Hi all, a bit of news from the classical chess engine world. So this is a game between two classical engines, Stockfish. Actually, this is the development version of 22nd of August 2018. So this was playing white against Houdini, who has only lost prior to this game one game against Ethereal, and Stockfish so far hasn't been beaten. So this is a mighty clash of two of the heavyweights of the tournament. They're starting to call like the big three, but maybe Leela's part of the big four potentially. But the big three, Stockfish, Houdini and Komodo. So let's see, this is a clash of two of them. E4 from Stockfish, we have E6. Now fascinatingly, you would think this is a good recipe for having the position closed, which would be good in general anti-computer chess as well. If your opponent's outgunning you tactically, you might want to try and keep the position more positional and quiet. And so the French would seem much more sensible than the Sicilian defence, especially a razor-sharp open Sicilian, you'd think. Let's see what happened in this game. So is this a good choice from Houdini? So we have the Tarrasch variation, knight d2, and now c5. It's the open Tarrasch. Knight f6 encourages the closed variation, which a lot of games have trodden on this path, which is very, very heavily trodden here from this position. But we have c5, knight to gf3, knight f6. Another highly trodden path is c takes with e takes. This line, where white usually has a small edge, taking with the knight especially is much more popular than having getting the queens off. So this has been seen in a lot of games, and the continuations get quite tactical after knight f5, for example. But here we see knight f6, and this gives Stockfish a space advantage, really. e5, knight fd7, c3, but with that space is a potential liability of the centre kind of collapsing. d4 in particular seems a little bit awkward to protect here. Bishop d3 is played, and you'll note that if white wants to play, say white wants to play knight b3, there's always c4. So protecting d4 seems a bit of a challenge actually with this congestion. So in other words, there might actually be gambit implications of this, because sometimes white might actually encourage black just to take that off and open up the position more. So that's a really a key point here after bishop d3, that this centre d4 could be dangerous. We see actually now g6, which tries to blunt the bishop. Black's really trying to have the cake and eat it, blunt white's attacking pieces and put pressure on d4 later. What could possibly go wrong with this approach? We have a very aggressive move from Stockfish. h4. Pardon me. So after h4 we have queen b6. So is black just getting very comfortable pressure on d4 here? White just ignores it with h5. It is a gambit. It is basically a gambit. Now, curiously, rook g8 was played. If we look at this, let's test this gambit with c takes. C takes, knight takes. We have an interesting gambit position. Knight takes, knight f3, say check. This position is dangerous. There's a possibility of bishop takes g6 check here with that pin. Black probably does best to leave that for this position, but then this is just horrible after bishop h5. With the prospect of rook h3 coming up and rook g3, this is just a nightmare, in fact. This is given as like one of the best continuations, which doesn't bode well to offer the queen. So, in fact, black plays a sensible looking rook g8 before trying to win this pawn. Another possibility is g5. This gets really interesting, and sometimes this is a thematic move in the French to undermine the centre. Now here, there's a lot of variations I put in the pinned comment of the video, because I think there is a broader question about keeping the position closed, how it can be opened up against the French defence. And it's interesting, does this shield black from the tactical pressure a little bit more? Let's have a look. C takes here. Knight f3, hold to the bishop, hold to the pawn, hits the queen. So all with tempo. This secondary and tertiary pawn gambits seem to actually backfire here after knight takes h7. This is fascinating. Things are exploding, like in open sense, opening up. And here it seems white's trump card is this f6, that last remaining pawn in center pegs into f6 here. So this is really interesting. With bishop takes f6, this kind of variation ends up being better for white. We could even follow this to an endgame scenario. This is better for white. Let me just adjust something I've just noticed on stream, the brightness a bit. There we go. So it was slightly annoying me. Okay. Bit brighter there. Okay. So yeah, these are really fascinating implications of G5. And you can see a lot of variations in the pinned comment of this with G5. Really fascinating stuff. If we follow that through again, if H6 here. And this is just so avoiding the loss of a pawn there. But this is also interesting. This is really cool, bishop f4, with the idea of trapping the queen. Some really cool possibilities. That traps the queen there. And that will be an advantage for white. So yeah, just to recap on that line, c takes, c takes. On c takes c4, this is just a disaster move because of knight c takes e5 hitting the bishop, by the way. That's not a legitimate way of opening up the position. So let's go through this again. Knight takes. Let's just recap. Queen takes. Now on knight takes, you might also ask in this variation, then here is actually also, with taking on h7, it seems as though this is also a small edge for white ultimately. An example, check, king f1, it doesn't matter about the king being there. And the key move b3 to again echo this f6 square, believe it or not, and the dark squares in general, gripping the dark squares. So for example, if taking, knight d takes e5, knight takes, even if the queens come off, it still is very nice for white. This kind of scenario because of here. And if taking takes f6, this ends up being in white's favour. Yeah, there's some fascinating stuff behind the scenes. So, as I say, the main line seems to be with queen takes, and then this treble sort of pawn gambit now, taking pawn there. On knight d takes e5, knight takes, check. This is dangerous for black after check, very dangerous. Bishop c3, and you can see knight takes d5 is smashing through things. So yeah, there is a lot of scary stuff behind the scenes, it seems, relating to g5. So in the game, rook g8, and curiously, my Stockfish 9, so mine's not dev obviously, but I don't know if the Stockfish dev team have been looking at my form pawn videos recently, but my Stockfish 9 locally does not do the next move. Stockfish 9 installs the form pawn. I even went for a shower and came back, and h6 was not the top choice. So I do wonder if some tweaking has been going on, or is it just in a much greater depth? It has realised the power of the mighty form pawn here with h6. The form pawn has shares in two universes of the game, the middle game universe and also the end game simultaneously. So it's an interesting middle game and end game asset simultaneously. It does sometimes close positions inappropriately for sure. It sometimes is a liability inappropriately for sure. But there are big advantages potentially for middle game and end game at the same time. And here, locking up black's pieces is a big thing with the king still in the center. So black's already forfeited castling rights on the king side, and it's very difficult to imagine castling on the queen side here. We do seem to have already a recipe for a total disaster. a5 is played. Now, we can check this out again, but this flavour of it is very just advantageous to white to do this. If we look, for example, at this variation, king e2 is a nice move to get the rooks together and exploit that c-file rather quickly. When this kind of thing happens, there's a very nice variation here I checked out with showing the dangers, like here, but also in this line, instead of a5, say g5, then this is very nice. The dark squares are pierced here, rook infiltration, king in the center. These rooks are just silly. This all ends up in white's favor. This kind of thing, even this kind of scenario, the exchange down, but loads of pawns. With the form pawn, yeah, the asset for the endgame scenario is massive for white. There's also, let me see. Okay, so yeah, CDs doesn't seem like a good idea. So it's delayed, a4, and it's delayed again. And now it's here that black really is locked up. The form pawn is locking up black significantly over here. And these pieces are so tangled, it's difficult to imagine casting queenside, basically. The knight would have to move back, bishop to d7. I mean, maybe that was the way to go, because I've seen actually a Michael Adams game at least with knight retreat coming. I think I've seen that idea, just putting the knight away so bishop d7 happens, then casting queenside. And maybe this is a key point, if there are improvements, because this next move maybe goes to white's strengths tactically. It opens up the position, especially with the king in the center. It's like there's more of the crown jewels available on show if the position's opened up here for black rather than white, basically. And the position's opening up now. Black does snap this pawn, and we're talking irrevocable damage now. This gambit, a point of no return now. And after queen b6, it becomes quite clear actually that bishop b5 is a really nasty position for black, because the rooks are disconnected, which means you can almost imagine white just puts loads of pressure on the c-file and hits c8, just wins c8 and like with some murderous attack. This black's just paralyzed here. So it's not just opened up for white, that c-file basically, which is lethal here. Black's just, yeah, the c8, the whole c8, c7, it just looks like a nightmare already. Queen d8 is played. If f6, then e takes and bishop f4. This position is just an infiltration via that c-file, and it's just absolutely crushing this kind of thing. Yeah, white ends up with big advantages whenever happens there. So we have queen d8. Yeah, f6 just opens up the position even more basically. So queen d3, but white though with the connected rooks is able to double these rooks a lot quicker than the black rooks ever will in this position. Bishop e3. We have b6, which threatens to use the c5 square. So that is like a positional threat, but it's extinguished. White gives up the bishop pair voluntarily. And maybe that's why bishop b5 is such a key move, because now, as we've seen many times, many examples, when you give up a bishop of a light square, you sometimes get a grip on the dark squares, and vice versa. Is that the case here? Is this part of a massive dark square campaign? Well, white actually now even offers another pawn with rook c1 just to accelerate the c-file usage. Not wasting time protecting this pawn to try and double. No, immediately going for that c-file. Black snaps this off. Rook c3, bishop d7, rook fc1. So white is 2 pawns down. And they say engine games are not fun. This is a double pawn gambit. It's really super aggressive play. And it even has a form pawn, this game. So yeah, and yeah, I am a fan of Stockfish as well, by the way, as well as Houdini, which is my second. I actually bought the Houdini chess engine as well. So I've also got Leela now to also consult, because I put the weights file the same as another UCI option. You can easily do that. There are instructions on the Leela site. So I've got all three. And yeah, two of my favourites are battling out here. So, but it seems black's really, this pawn is holding the king in. The king can't even go over there, it's holding black's pieces in, and white's just building up on this c file. It's like paralyzed, but white is still building up. An unfortunate situation. So things like rook c7 and bishop b6, you know, might be on the cards. King e8 is played. So if rook c8, then taking bishop takes is possible here because of rook takes c8. Yeah, this c file is a disaster area. Here, knight g5, for example, and then knight takes is just a nightmare. So we have actually king e8. This doesn't inspire confidence. The infiltration, bishop c5, and now actually even Stockfish played rook b7, but even it's so good the position here that bishop takes c5 is good. Even losing the exchange is good for white here. It's so good. There are targets here. It's difficult for black to really defend this. But we have actually rook b7, super cruel. The reason is now bishop g5. And now rook takes c5. So trying to go for rook e7 if that's taken rook e7. So we have queen takes. So basically, white has further empowerment on the dark square. Has taken out black's dark square bishop. And the c-file still remains a liability. And the dark squares, you can see things like queen a3. Look at the dark squares as well. And in fact, yeah, this is just a nightmare. If b takes, check, and knight d4 shows the true nightmare. For example, c takes, queen a3, and there's no defense here. This is just mating. It's horrible. So the dark squares are absolutely lethal with the king in the center here. With this dark square bishop without a counterpart, yeah. So, yeah, just to have a look at that relation again, just to marvel at it here. Yeah, knight d4, key move here. And if it's ignored, then just, sorry, if it's ignored with rook b8, then just queen f3. And this is just totally destructive. Black would have to give up the queen. So, anyway, white has further pressure on the dark squares after this exchange sack. And black's truly helpless here. So extra 2 pawns don't mean anything here in this position. The bishop and the queen are conspiring here, as well as the rook. These 3 pieces in particular. We have b5 trying to close up against queen a3 for b4. So if queen a3, this wasn't played, b4. White still has an edge there, but the white queen wants to help its dark square partner in crime. Queen d4 to get onto c5. Hit c6 as well, potentially. King d7. On queen a7, you might think, well, that leaves the bishop hanging, and there's also queen f4 now. It's horrible for black, basically. So we have king d7. Now queen c5, yeah, with massive queen d6 and queen e7 ideas. King c8, just offering the bishop. Very resourceful if it's taken, because actually, in this scenario, remember, white's the exchange down. If white takes this scenario actually turns out to be very difficult. It might actually be dynamically equal. You know, black's got a 2-to-1 pawn majority. It's tricky. But Stockfish plays the much more crushing knight d4. Keeping the queens on the board is much more of a serious concern for king safety than any endgame right now. So knight takes, and in fact, black's pretty desperate to avoid this attacking potential and has to give up the rook, it seems. And now bishop up. This endgame, and we've got the fawn pawn, that duality of the fawn pawn is good in endgames. It's only 2 steps away from queening. So here, it's really not so hard to convert this position. Let's have a look. Bishop drops back. We've still got that fawn pawn though, as well as other pawns. Now that weakens that second row, which means now the second row is much more sensitive after rook b6. King c8 is played, trying to stop at least rook b7, but now rook b6. e5, and guess what? The fawn pawn plays a big role here tactically. White's play, if I give you 5 seconds. Yes, I did guess this move on the stream, and no, I didn't look at the point of view of the engines. I don't cheat like that. Looking at the point of view of the engines, that's not something I do usually. I only occasionally look at the positions they might be examining. But here I did spot rook takes g6. The pawn's queening here if taken. There's no stopping the pawn. So this is just a disaster. Black plays f4, rook g7. Takes that pawn, so doesn't care about the bishop here. This is just a totally winning position. The two connected passed pawns are absolutely decisive. Doesn't even matter about the e3. It's not as scary as it seems. This threatens the queen, so check. Rook check, not rook takes e5, rook check. And now taking here, the king can handle that. And the two passed pawns are clearly just easily winning here. The king's far too far away. So the game ended like this. Well, exactly like this, not just like this. So here, checkmate. So this is one of the most vicious games I've witnessed between the traditional engines. I asked people, did they really, they thought this was one of the better games of the tournament, just as a sanity check of what I just saw. Indeed, many people thought it was, and hence I'm sharing it with you. I hope you got something out of it. So the lesson here is, if you want to keep the position closed against the strongest engine in the world, Stockfish, play the Sicilian defense. Don't play the French defense, which is a very, very strange lesson from these two game samples. But maybe there's some interesting truth overall in that. Okay, because Leela was able to keep the position more closed in a way than Houdini did here. It seems the space advantage could be converted into a nasty gambit. So from closed to open became a real possibility in this game, as it did. But in the Sicilian defense game against Leela, it was Leela's like dynamic pressure which kept things in a way locked down, positional, and without incurring a significant space advantage. Now, I'm not saying the Sicilian defense is better than the French defense, but it's interesting to compare the two games from the perspective of someone playing black. If you want to play against someone who's much stronger tactically than you, you might think the closed openings, but yeah, that conversion of space into blasting a position open via a gambit is intriguing to consider. Comments, questions, likes, shares appreciated. Thanks very much.